Stop for a moment. Look up from whatever you are reading this on and find something across the room. A clock on the wall, the label on a bottle, the face of someone sitting nearby. Now ask yourself honestly, is it sharp? Or is there a soft haze around the edges that was not there a few years ago? If you wear glasses, think about the last time you updated your prescription, and the time before that, and the time before that. If you are like millions of people, the pattern looks something like this. You go to the eye doctor, you get a stronger prescription. 6 months later, things are blurry again. You go back, the prescription gets stronger, the glasses get heavier, and the vision keeps getting worse. Here is what almost nobody in that entire process ever tells you. The glasses are not treating your problem. They are compensating for it. And the reason your vision keeps declining, the actual biological reason, has almost nothing to do with your eyes. It has everything to do with what is happening in your blood, right now, while you are watching this. Stay with me, because what I am about to share changes how you understand vision loss entirely. My name is Dr. David Aid, and today's video is one of the most important ones I have made on this channel. We are going to talk about vision, but not in the way you have heard it talked about before. We are not going to talk about prescriptions, floaters, or which brand of eye drops to buy. We are going to talk about the metabolic process that is silently damaging your eyesight right now, in most cases years before any doctor gives it a name. You have probably heard the word diabetes mentioned in connection with vision loss. Most people have. But here is what that conversation almost never includes. You do not need to be diabetic for blood sugar to be destroying your eyesight. You do not need a diagnosis. You do not need elevated numbers on a lab report. You need something far more subtle and far more common. Blood sugar that spikes and crashes throughout the day. That runs slightly too high, slightly too often, slightly too long. That chronically floods certain tissues with glucose. That pattern, which research suggests affects the majority of adults over 55, is quietly damaging the most metabolically vulnerable tissue in your entire body, your eyes. And today I am going to walk you through exactly how that damage happens, mechanism by mechanism, and then give you a specific, practical, food-based protocol that addresses each one. But before we go any further, I need to say something very clearly. There are certain symptoms that mean you stop this video and call a doctor today, not tomorrow. Today, sudden vision loss in one eye that came on within hours or a day or two. A curtain or dark shadow moving across your visual field. A sudden flood of new floaters, dozens of dark spots or strings appearing where there were none before. Flashing lights in your peripheral vision that come and go repeatedly. Any one of those signs points to acute retinal damage or detachment. These are emergencies. No part of what I discuss today applies to those situations. You need a same-day ophthalmology evaluation if any of those symptoms are happening to you. If none of those apply to you, if what you have is a gradual blurring, difficulty reading fine print that has worsened over months, halos around lights at night, or a general haziness that your current glasses no longer fully correct, then stay right here, because what I'm about to describe is almost certainly happening inside your body right now. Let us start with something that happens to almost everyone with variable blood sugar, and that almost nobody has ever had properly explained to them. Your eye has a lens. It sits just behind your pupil, and its job is to focus light onto the back wall of the eye, the retina. That lens is made almost entirely of water and protein. And here is something most people do not know. The lens has no blood vessels. It cannot receive nutrients directly from your circulation the way your organs do. Instead, it absorbs glucose directly from the fluid that surrounds it. Now think about what happens when your blood sugar rises after a meal. Say you ate pasta, white bread, something sweet. Your glucose climbs, and as your blood glucose rises, the glucose concentration in the fluid surrounding your lens rises with it. When glucose enters the lens in excess, it gets converted by an enzyme inside the lens into a compound called sorbitol. Here's where it gets important. Sorbitol cannot leave the lens. It has no exit route. It is trapped inside. And because it is what scientists call osmotically active, meaning it attracts water toward itself the way a dry sponge pulls moisture from a wet surface, the lens physically absorbs water. It swells. A swollen lens cannot focus correctly. The focal point shifts. Things that were sharp become soft. Fine print blurs. And because this is a fluid shift, not a structural change, It is reversible. This explains something that confuses millions of people and that almost no one has ever explained to them. Why is your vision worse on some days than others? Why is it sharper in the morning before eating than in the late afternoon? Why does a prescription you just got 6 months ago suddenly feel wrong again? Your vision is not randomly fluctuating. Your lens is inflating and deflating based on your blood sugar. It is responding to every meal, every glucose spike, every rise and fall in the fluid that feeds it. This is not speculation. This is basic lens physiology. And once you understand it, a lot of things start making sense. A morning when you skipped breakfast or ate something light, your vision felt crisp. An afternoon after a pasta lunch, everything was slightly soft. You probably chalked it up to tiredness or eye strain. It was not tiredness, it was glucose. And if this mechanism is already happening to you, the good news is that it is among the most directly correctable aspects of what we are going to discuss. It responds quickly to changes in how and when you eat. People who implement the protocol I will describe in the second half of this video often notice clearer morning vision within the first few weeks. Not because we reversed damage, but because we removed the daily trigger. The second mechanism is slower, more silent, and ultimately more destructive. Your retina, the thin sheet of light-sensitive tissue at the back of your eye, is fed by the smallest blood vessels in the human body. Capillaries so narrow that red blood cells pass through them single file. These vessels are the entire lifeline of your visual system. The retina contains approximately 130 million photoreceptor cells, the cells that capture light and convert it into the electrical signal your brain reads as vision. Without the capillaries feeding them oxygen and fuel, those cells begin to fail. Chronically elevated blood sugar damages these capillaries through a process called glycation. Glycation is what happens when glucose molecules chemically attach to proteins and fats in your body. They bond to them. They deform their structure. They make flexible things stiff and functional things dysfunctional. Think of it this way. The walls of your capillaries are built from flexible proteins. They are designed to stretch, to contract, to regulate what passes through them, to remain intact under pressure. When glucose glycates those proteins over time, the walls stiffen. They thicken, like a rubber hose that very slowly turns to ceramic. It loses its give. It becomes brittle. It develops leaks. When the capillaries feeding your retina begin to leak, fluid and blood seep into the surrounding tissue. The retina swells. Visual signals become distorted. This is the process that clinicians call diabetic retinopathy when it occurs in diagnosed diabetics. But the underlying mechanism, capillary glycation, begins years and sometimes decades before anyone receives a diabetes diagnosis. You do not need that diagnosis for this process to be running in your retina right now. You need cumulative glycation exposure. And cumulative glycation exposure is a function of how high your blood sugar runs, how often and for how long, not whether your fasting glucose number has crossed a clinical threshold on a standard test. The retina is also extraordinary in one specific way. Gram for gram, it consumes more oxygen and more glucose than your brain. It is the most metabolically demanding tissue in your body. That means it benefits most when the metabolic environment is healthy, and it suffers most when the metabolic environment is toxic. This is not a slow metaphorical decline. It is a physical, measurable narrowing of blood vessel diameter. It is a measurable reduction in perfusion, in oxygen delivery to those 130 million photoreceptors. And it advances every year that the blood sugar environment stays dysregulated, regardless of whether the person has a clinical name for their condition. Now let us talk about the macula. The macula is a small central region of the retina, roughly the size of a pencil eraser, responsible for the sharpest, most detailed portion of your vision. Reading small text, recognizing a face across the room, threading a needle. All of that precision vision comes from the macula. The macula degenerates in a condition called macular degeneration, one of the leading causes of irreversible vision loss in people over 60. And its vulnerability is directly tied to the same metabolic mechanisms we have been discussing. Here is why. The macula contains two specific pigments called lutein and zeaxanthin. These pigments act as the macula's built-in internal filter. They absorb high-energy blue and ultraviolet light before it reaches the delicate photoreceptors underneath. Think of them as the sunglasses your retina wears internally, every second of every waking hour. When blood sugar is chronically elevated, retinal tissue is flooded with oxidative stress, an overproduction of chemically reactive molecules called free radicals that attack cell structures. Lutein and zeaxanthin are consumed, neutralizing those free radicals. They are used up, and they are depleted faster than the body can replenish them. When the macula's protective pigment falls low, light reaches the photoreceptors unfiltered. Damage accumulates. Visual acuity falls. And for most people over 60, those pigments are already running low simply because their diets are low in dark green leafy vegetables. Add blood sugar dysregulation, and the depletion accelerates significantly. This is why macular degeneration is not simply an aging condition. It is an aging plus metabolic environment condition. The aging part we cannot change. The metabolic environment we absolutely can. And there is a specific, highly accessible food that delivers lutein and zeaxanthin in the most bioavailable form of anything you can find at a regular grocery store. I will come back to that in a moment, because the way that food needs to be prepared and what it needs to be eaten with changes everything about whether the nutrients are actually absorbed. Here is a connection that almost never gets discussed in standard eye conversations, and I want to spend a few minutes on it because it affects a significant portion of people watching. Your eye and your kidney share an important biological feature. Both are heavily supplied by a particular type of tiny blood vessel that is uniquely vulnerable to glycation damage. This is why, in people with long-standing blood sugar dysregulation, kidney function and retinal function tend to decline together. The same damage mechanism runs in both organs simultaneously. But the connection goes further. When kidney function begins to decline, a cascade follows. Fluid retention increases. Blood pressure rises. And the delicate pressure balance inside the eye, called intraocular pressure, is affected. Elevated intraocular pressure is the primary driver of glaucoma. Glaucoma is the condition that progressively destroys the optic nerve, the cable that carries visual information from the retina to the brain. And glaucoma is particularly dangerous because it produces no pain. It steals peripheral vision first, so gradually that most people do not notice until significant, irreversible damage has already occurred. The chain looks like this. Blood sugar dysregulation damages microvascular tissue. The kidney's tiny vessels glycate. Kidney function declines. Fluid retention increases. Blood pressure rises. Intraocular pressure rises. The optic nerve is slowly compressed. That entire sequence runs over years. It runs quietly. And it almost never gets presented as the single connected chain it actually is. But understanding it as a chain tells you something important. If you intervene at the beginning of the chain, you interrupt everything downstream. The earliest and most powerful intervention point is blood sugar regulation. I want to tell you about someone I will call Eleanor. Eleanor was 67 years old, retired, reasonably fit and active, no diabetes diagnosis. She had been to her optometrist twice in 3 years, and both times came away with a stronger prescription and no explanation for why the decline was happening. At her second visit, the optometrist noted what are called drusen deposits, small protein accumulations under the retina that are associated with elevated macular degeneration risk. The doctor told Eleanor to eat more leafy greens, wear good sunglasses, and come back in a year for monitoring. She was told there was nothing to do except watch. Eleanor did exactly what she was told. She added more salads, she wore her sunglasses outside, and her vision kept getting worse. When Eleanor described her situation in more detail, a pattern emerged that she had noticed but never connected. Her blurring was consistently worse in the late afternoon. It was noticeably clearer in the morning before eating. After a dinner that included pasta, bread, something sweet, the halos around her bedroom lamp were nearly unbearable that night. After a day of eating mostly vegetables and protein, her vision felt measurably clearer. She had observed all of this, but nobody had ever told her that her lens was physically swelling and shrinking in response to glucose. Nobody had told her that the fine vessels feeding her retina were being damaged by the same process happening in her bloodstream every single day. Her fasting glucose was 102, not diabetic, not even technically pre-diabetic by most clinical definitions, a number that generates no concern at a standard appointment. But her postprandial glucose, the spike after eating, had never been measured. And it is the spike, not the fasting number, that drives the mechanisms we have been discussing. Eleanor followed the protocol I am about to share for 4 months. The afternoon blurring reduced within the first 6 weeks. The halos around lights diminished. On her next imaging evaluation, her drusen progression had stabilized, not reversed. The damage already done does not undo itself. But it stopped progressing, because the environment causing it had changed. Eleanor is not unusual. She is typical of millions of people whose gradual vision loss is being driven by metabolic conditions that are never identified, never addressed, and never connected to the lens sitting behind the pupil that is quietly inflating and deflating every single day. Now let us talk about something that makes all of this worse, the silent nutritional depletion that runs alongside the mechanisms we have covered. 3 nutrients are specifically critical for retinal health and specifically depleted by blood sugar dysregulation. The first is thiamine, vitamin B1. Thiamine is essential for glucose metabolism in neurons and in the specialized cells of the retina. When blood sugar is chronically elevated, thiamine is consumed at an accelerated rate as the body processes the excess glucose. Research indicates that a significant number of people with blood sugar dysregulation are functionally deficient in thiamine, even when standard blood levels appear normal, because the tissue demand is outpacing the supply. Thiamine deficiency in the retina impairs the ganglion cells, the cells that carry visual signals from the retina to the brain. The signal does not disappear entirely. It degrades. Vision becomes less sharp, less contrasty, less crisp, even when the structural health of the eye appears intact on imaging. This is a form of vision loss that does not show up on a standard retinal scan, but that is directly and measurably affected by nutritional status. The second is magnesium. Magnesium is involved in more than 300 enzymatic reactions in the human body, including the mechanisms that regulate blood vessel tone and protect against oxidative damage in neural tissue. It is also required for proper insulin signaling, which means magnesium deficiency makes blood sugar dysregulation worse, which increases retinal damage, which depletes more magnesium. The two conditions drive each other in a progressively worsening loop. Clinical research estimates that the majority of adults over 60 are insufficient in magnesium. Most have no idea because magnesium is not included on a standard metabolic panel. If your doctor has never mentioned it, that is almost certainly why. The third is zinc. The retina has one of the highest concentrations of zinc of any tissue in the human body. Zinc is essential for what is called the visual cycle, the biochemical sequence by which light signals are converted into the neural signals your brain reads as images. It is also essential for the enzymes that protect retinal tissue from oxidative damage. Zinc absorption decreases with age, particularly in people whose stomach acid production has declined, which is the majority of people over 60. When zinc falls low, the visual cycle runs less efficiently, and the retina's antioxidant defenses are weakened at exactly the moment they need to be strongest. 3 nutrients, all depleted by the same metabolic conditions driving the other mechanisms, and all replenishable through specific accessible foods, not exotic supplements. Ordinary grocery store foods prepared in specific ways. That is what the protocol is built around. Let me walk you through it. Morning. Begin the day with a blood sugar stabilizing meal before consuming any simple carbohydrate. 2 eggs, including the yolks, a small portion of smoked fish, full-fat plain yogurt with a tablespoon of ground flaxseed, something built on protein and fat. This is not about eliminating carbohydrates from your life. It is about sequencing and timing. A morning meal built on protein and fat blunts the early glucose spike and reduces the sorbitol accumulation in the lens that occurs in the 2 hours after eating. The morning glucose response sets the metabolic tone for the rest of the day. Start it flat, and the rest of the day tends to follow. Add cooked leafy greens at some point during the morning or early afternoon. Cooked spinach, cooked kale, cooked collard greens, not raw. I want to pause on that point because it surprises most people. Cooking breaks down the cellular walls that lock lutein and zeaxanthin inside the plant. A half cup of cooked spinach delivers more bioavailable lutein than 3 cups of raw spinach. And here is the second part of that. Add a teaspoon of olive oil or a small amount of butter alongside those greens. Lutein and zeaxanthin are fat-soluble nutrients. Without fat in the same meal, they pass through your digestive system without being absorbed. You can eat spinach every day and receive almost none of the macular protection it is capable of providing if you eat it dry and raw. Fat plus heat. That is the combination that unlocks what the leafy greens contain. Daytime. The central daytime practice is managing the postprandial spike, the glucose surge after eating. There is one rule that applies to every meal. Fiber and protein first. Starch and sugar last. When you eat vegetables and protein at the beginning of a meal and leave the starchy or sweet items for the end, glucose enters the bloodstream at roughly half the rate compared to eating in the reverse order. This has been documented in multiple clinical trials. The same foods, same portions, different sequence, dramatically different blood sugar response. This is one of the highest leverage, lowest cost changes anyone can make. The second daytime practice is a 10-minute walk after your two largest meals. Not a workout, not a gym session. A walk around the block. A slow 10 minutes through the neighborhood. What happens physiologically during that walk is that muscle contraction pulls glucose directly out of the bloodstream and into muscle tissue without requiring insulin. That 10-minute walk after dinner reduces the postprandial glucose peak by a clinically meaningful amount. It is the lowest cost retinal protective intervention available to any person, regardless of age or fitness level. Evening and nutrient replenishment. Raw, unsalted pumpkin seeds. A small handful, roughly 30 grams, in the late afternoon or with dinner. These provide both zinc and magnesium in a highly bioavailable form. These are not capsules. They are food. The minerals arrive in a matrix the body recognizes and absorbs efficiently. Herring. Regular salted herring from any grocery store. 2 or 3 servings per week, about 100 grams per serving. Herring provides thiamine alongside vitamin D and the omega-3 fatty acids that reduce systemic inflammation and directly support the structural integrity of retinal cell membranes. This is not an exotic fish. It is affordable, widely available, and nutritionally one of the most underrated foods for eye health. Egg yolks, 2 per day as part of your regular meals. I want to address this directly because I know the question is coming. Egg yolks contain lutein and zeaxanthin in the most bioavailable form of any food available. More bioavailable than dark leafy greens, more bioavailable than supplements, because the fat already present in the yolk ensures full absorption. The concerns about egg yolks and cardiovascular risk have been substantially revised in the clinical literature over the past decade. For most people, 2 egg yolks per day fall well within what current research supports as appropriate. And for the purpose of this conversation, the more relevant fact is that egg yolks are the single most efficient lutein delivery vehicle available at an ordinary grocery store. Before bed. One practice only. Stop eating at least 2.5 hours before sleep. The last food of the day should be finished well before you lie down. Eating close to sleep creates a glucose excursion during the first hours of the night, precisely when the retina is supposed to be undergoing its primary repair cycle. The photoreceptors that worked all day rebuilding their light-sensitive outer segments do this repair during deep sleep. A blood sugar spike during that window competes with the repair process. Give the retina its recovery window by giving the digestive system its rest window. Here are 2 things you can observe right now without any equipment. The time of day test. Pay attention to whether your blurring follows a pattern. Worse 30 to 90 minutes after eating, particularly after starchy or sweet meals. Noticeably clearer in the morning before breakfast. That is the lens swelling pattern. That is blood sugar driving the blurring, not irreversible structural change in your eye. The 7-day food journal. For 1 week, write down what you ate and make a simple note about your vision quality 1 hour later. Not in detail, just clear or blurry, better or worse than this morning. Most people who do this for 7 days see a pattern their eye doctor has never told them to look for because eye doctors do not ask what you had for lunch. If you discover a clear connection between what you eat and how well you see within an hour or 2, that is significant clinical information. Share it with your doctor. Ask about postprandial glucose monitoring. Ask whether a continuous glucose monitor might be appropriate for a short trial period. Your observation is data. Let me bring everything together. We have covered 5 interconnected mechanisms through which blood sugar dysregulation damages vision. The first is lens swelling. Glucose spikes cause sorbitol to accumulate inside the lens, pulling water into it, changing its focal length, and producing the kind of variable blurring that makes prescriptions feel outdated within months. The second is retinal capillary glycation. Chronically elevated blood sugar stiffens and damages the smallest blood vessels feeding the retina, impairing oxygen delivery to the 130 million photoreceptors responsible for your vision. The third is macular pigment depletion. Oxidative stress generated by blood sugar dysregulation depletes lutein and zeaxanthin, the protective pigments that filter damaging light before it can destroy the macula's delicate photoreceptors. The fourth is the kidney-eye pressure connection. Microvascular damage to the kidneys contributes to rising blood pressure, which raises intraocular pressure, which progressively damages the optic nerve in the condition we call glaucoma. The fifth is nutrient depletion. Thiamine, magnesium, and zinc are all depleted by the same metabolic conditions driving the other four mechanisms, and all three are essential for retinal function, the visual cycle, and protection against oxidative damage. The protocol addresses all five, not through medication, not through a procedure, through the sequence of your meals, the preparation of your food, a handful of pumpkin seeds, 2 egg yolks, a 10-minute walk, and a hard stop on eating before sleep. The prescription you keep updating is not the answer to what is happening in your eyes. The answer is changing the metabolic environment that is causing the deterioration. Your retina is not failing because you are getting older. It is struggling because it is being bathed in a chemical environment that slowly damages the finest blood vessels and the most energy-intensive tissue in your body. And that environment can be changed, not with a specialist visit, not with a stronger lens, with the sequence of your meals, a handful of seeds, and 10 minutes of walking after dinner. Your eyes are not the problem. They are the report. Now you know how to read it. Before you go, I have a quick question for you in the comments. How old are you? I genuinely want to know. The timeline of how quickly these mechanisms develop and how fast the protective nutrients are depleted shifts meaningfully with each decade past 55. Knowing who is watching this helps me shape what I cover next on this channel, and I read every comment. If this video gave you something your eye doctor never mentioned, please share it with someone who needs it. That one share could genuinely change the trajectory of their vision over the next decade. Hit the like button if this was useful, subscribe if you are not already, and I will see you in the next one. Take care of your eyes. They are the only pair you will ever have.